Hi, everyone. This is Behind the Sportsbook Counter with Kenny White. I'm Alexandra. We're going to get into fascinating stories about sports betting, old and new. Last time we talked about your first bet being at 10 years old, and at 12 years old, you were correlating your father's college football magazine around a ping pong table. Now, I know when you were 12, you also have a story about Wrigley Field. Can you tell us that one?
Yeah, I sure can. That was a busy year for me at 12 years old. I learned a lot about sports betting that year. Well, Chicago Cub totals have always been fascinating to everyone because they can range from 6.5 to as high as 14. I've seen 15 on those totals some games, and that's pre-flop. The wind dictates the play there because it's one of the stadiums that the wind does whip through. And we have Chicago is known as the Windy City. Well, my dad was working at Bill Dark's Racing Sportsbook, North Las Vegas, Nevada. And Bill was like the originator of of totals. And his first total was a baseball game. And rumor has it, my dad has told me maybe his brother Bob Dark put some totals up before Bill did downtown Las Vegas. But Bill is kind of given credit for the total because his first total was a major rivalry game. The Dodgers and Giants. Sandy Koufax was up against Juan Marichal, the two best pitchers in baseball. And they'd faced each other several times. Very low scoring games. And everybody out and sitting in the sports book, they were talking about that game all day. And everybody was saying 2-1, 3-2, 3-1, 4-2, 3-1, 2-0. And they're throwing out all these low scores, what the game's going to be. And Bill thought, wow, if I put a total up this, maybe I can get a lot of action to people to bet this, but I got to find a total that's low enough for me to get over money on as well. I thought the original total that he put up in that baseball game was 5.5, but since I've read a couple things that he put up 3.5 in the game is what I've read. I'm not sure how accurate that is. I'll have to ask my dad one of these days if he remembers the total and if he was even there. I don't think he was there because it was in the late 60s. But anyway, my dad's working there as a cashier. You are allowed to wager there if you work there. Bill did not mind. So my dad would call home. I had his desk in his office, had two phones on it. He'd call me on one. I'd pick it up. And he just told me he was going to start doing this. It was like summertime. I was out of school. I'll call you. But what he was doing before that, he was calling using the payphone. At the Del Mar, he would go back and he'd have to put all these quarters in the payphone. So instead of using the payphone, he could call me. I'm out of school now. It's summertime. And he calls and he says, all right, call the weather information number on the other phone, 976-312-1212. I'll never forget the number. I've been calling it I was calling them all my life. It's no longer in use. Obviously, phone numbers, you don't need to call weather anymore. You can get it right on the internet. So I called the weather. You wanted me to write exactly down the temperature of the day and what the wind direction was. And that wind direction, then he would use it. He had a diagram of the baseball field of Wrigley Field from the baseball dope book. And they had all the teams' diagrams with where north was pointed to. And in Wrigley, north is out to left center. I got the weather the first day, and it said north winds 10 to 20. So I looked at the diagram. He's got a little north, south, west, east diagram to put over top of it so you could really tell which way the wind was blowing. And that northeast wind was out to center field to me. So I said, Dad, it says center field 10 to 20 miles an hour. He says, okay, good. I'm going to bet it over. The total's 8. So he bet the game over, and the game went 3-2. He lost and came home, and next day went back to work, called me the next day and said, all right, time for you to call the weather. I called the weather number, and the wind was now southwest 15 to 25. Little stronger winds, but changed directions. So I looked at the directions on the chart, and I said, it's blowing in from center field 15 to 25. Oh, good. It totals 8.5 today, a little bit higher. So he went under the 8.5, and boom, home run after home run. And the one thing in that day, if it wasn't on TV, you were going to get the score off the ticker. And the ticker would come across every half inning, but it will also give you home runs during those innings. So it was home run after home run, and he knew there was something wrong. When he got home, he said, you got to show me exactly what you're doing. And I just showed him the chart. Here it is, southwest, 15 to 25, in from center field. He said, oh, boy, oh, no, I forgot to tell you that they're telling you where the wind is coming from, not going to. And I'm like, I'm 12 years old. How am I supposed to know that? I'm just thinking it's, telling it's where it's going to. So it's a quick lesson. When they give you a weather report, it's where the wind's coming from. So very interesting. He lost those days, but we turned it around after that. I think he won quite a few totals. Bill Dark was not adjusting enough to the wind. He started adjusting the totals after my dad bet, though. He was adjusting more than a run off a $500 bet back in that day.
And still today, weather is factored in for sports betting, especially in baseball.
Yeah, no doubt. Wrigley Field is the most important park for wind direction because it's a smaller stadium. It's an older stadium, so the wind will travel in one direction. A couple other stadiums that I do like to follow, Fenway Park. You can get some winds there. Kansas City is another ballpark where winds will affect play, but there's a lot of stadiums that people think wind does affect play when it absolutely doesn't. St. Louis is one. That field's built 30 to 40 feet below ground level or sea level, and the wind swirls there in that stadium, doesn't blow in one direction.
Last time we spoke, we talked about you starting at Santa Anita. I know that you were just getting your foot in the door, writing the tickets, but you were also making bets, and Gary Austin's was fairly close. Gary Austin's race and sportsbook. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, great story there. While I was at the Santa Anita, obviously I started betting at 16 years old, but I started making my first numbers. When I was 16, I was just watching games and seeing who I liked and making bets. At 21, I actually handicapped the NBA and did power ratings, calculated my totals and did comparable scores and averaged them out. And I came out with a line before the betting line actually came out. And Gary Austin was a major player. And let me give you a Gary Austin story to start out with, where I used to play. It was walking distance from the Santa Anita. And Santa Anita, the guys were great. You didn't need to wait for your break or your lunch. If it was slow, they let you walk down and make a bet. Everybody behind the counter at Santa Anita was betting, and most were betting on the phones, but some of the writers, the young guys, would go down to Gary Austin's to bet. Now, Gary Austin, that was the Rose Bowl. And Gary Austin, before he owned the sports book, came to Vegas, very, very wealthy man, I guess, from California, made some money betting sports, made some money in real estate, came to Vegas to bet sports, and he got in the old the Castaways football contest, which was the biggest of the time, which ended up turning into the Hilton Super Contest, and now the Westgate Super Contest. That started at the Castaways. And Gary Austin won in 1978, and he may have won back-to-back years. That got him an interview in Sports Illustrated. And that was so big back in that day in the 70s to have sports betting written up in Sports Illustrated. Gary Austin started a sports service called the Austin Edge. He was able to gain so many clients from that one article in Sports Illustrated. And he was a winner at that point. He did win for his clients. So that brought him more money. He was able to generate enough money to buy the Rose Bowl Race and Sportsbook, renovate it, and name it Gary Austin's Race and Sportsbook. So we used to bet there all the time. And he had a major opinion. So you wanted to get ARBs, you wanted to get the best of the number, you had to go look at Gary's numbers. In that day and age, there was no computers. You had to go to each sportsbook. There was guys driving around town and would stop at each sportsbook. There was a guy named Pedals who drove his bicycle up and down the strip, stopping at each sportsbook. So Gary Austin's was a must-stop place for everybody because Gary stuck his neck out, which caused a big problem for Gary. Everybody wanted to bet with him, and he took on everybody. And he gave the same limits to the computer group of Billy Walters, to some of the sharpest bettors in the world. Chuck Sharp, who I talked about last time, they were letting Chuck bet limits on their NBA totals. And Gary had a big ego and thought he could beat everybody. He had millions of dollars on account from all of these people that just kept winning and leaving their money up in that account. And Gary started using the money to bet with personally. And then Gary went bad. Gary made a huge bet on the World Series in '85. And he had the St. Louis Cardinals to win the series against the Kansas City Royals. And St. Louis was up 3-1 and then lost game 5. And it was 3-2 going back to Kansas City. And Gary made a big bet on St. Louis, doubled up his money, and thought St. Louis would win game 6. And they led 1-0 to the 9th inning. and a base hit and a base hit, a bunt. It didn't turn into a sacrifice. The Cardinals got a force out at third, but then a pass ball moved the runners up, intentional walk, and a base hit by Dane Orge won the game for the Royals 2-1 and even the series, and the Royals went on to win. And Gary Austin lost so much money on that series that he had to actually fake a robbery. And he says to this day and age that it was a real robbery, but everyone in town knows it wasn't. There was actually a robbery. They did send guys in with masks and guns and rob the place. So people did see it. They did witness it, but everyone thought Gary was behind it, and he did it for one reason, was that he didn't have the money to pay off on his phone accounts and to all the bets he lost. And that was the end of Gary Austin's Race and Sportsbook. They had to close their doors, and it changed the landscape in Vegas forever. To sportsbooks actually had to put their money up in accounts and were not able to hold on to their own money to let something like that ever happen again.
Where's Gary Austin now?
Gary Austin started a sportsbook called Trade Winds. Another long story. And Trade Winds did very, very well. And it was just in the news in July. The FBI actually arrested Gary Austin in his home in Florida. They seized over $10 million in cash, 61 gold bars, and his homes and cars. I guess 6 luxury cars. So I haven't heard anything late if he's being prosecuted, if he's going to court. But they feel like he can only show the money he has made in his lifetime over the last 20 years has been all because of illegal sports gambling from owning a sports book in Central America. So I guess that's a story to wait to find out what happens to Gary Austin, but he's been very successful in his lifetime.
Can you tell us about some more scandals that happened early on in sports betting?
Yeah. There in this state there was a lot. And I think that sports betting was a necessary evil to casinos because they were worried about some of the stories they heard in these standalone sports books. But at the Stardust, Joey Sarno, the nicest little old man. He was such a nice guy. He used to come to the Santa Anita and bet there on his days off, and he would tip us $5 every day that he came in. And we just thought that was amazing. He was just such a nice little guy, and he would want to talk and ask you how you're doing. And then I found out one day, I couldn't believe it, that he was the cashier at the Stardust. And everyone in that day and age would, if they were from out of state, they would mail in their tickets. And those tickets would be sent to audit. They would be sent down to the sports book, to the cashier. The cashier would then punch and hand stamp the tickets. He would then put a check in the, he was supposed to send it back up to audit for a check to be put in the envelope to mailed out, but he turned around and he cashed them all. He didn't even give them to anybody. He was behind the counter. He would get the ticket. He'd hand stamp, punch it, cash it, and then put the cash in his pocket. He did it for 2 straight months. And it was over $100,000 that when they found out, he was long gone. And I don't think anybody heard from Joey ever again. And if they did, with the Stardust in those day and age was being run by Lefty Rosenthal, was part of the crew. Right before that, Lefty left. Scotty Shetler was actually running the Stardust at that time, but I still think there was some leftover residual of Lefty Rosenthal's crew, if you know what I mean.
I guess this episode is kind of turning into a scandal episode, but I know you had one from Santa Anita as well. Can you share that one?
Yeah, that's when we were at the Santa Anita. I was amazed when I found out that it was. I just basically started, I think, that year, and it was during football season. And there used to be these 2 kids that used to come up and bet. I say kids, they were early 20s like I was, but they looked younger than me. And one would come up and he would ask to make 4 bets, and he would bet them all. And I'd 4 on 1 ticket. And then all of a sudden, a couple minutes later, the other kid would come up and he would bet the exact opposite side for the same amounts as the other kid bet. And this went on for about 4 or 5 weeks. And after that, 4 or 5 weeks, I said to the one kid, I said, you know what? Your buddy always bets completely opposite of you. Why don't you guys just bet against each other and you would save the 10% juice? And I could tell I spooked the kid a little bit, and he just kind of shook and got out of there. And I had no idea why. I was 21 trying to figure out how to beat betting sports. I could care less about what they were doing. But I found out a month later, the auditor, they were being double audited at Santa Anita. The auditor had no idea there was a second auditing crew that was auditing the work, and the auditor was putting zeros. So when I wrote the ticket out for $44 to win 40, I left too much of a gap. My forward slash wasn't next to the numbers, and I left room. And I think they were targeting me of all the writers there because I left the most room, and that's why they were coming up to my window. But the auditor was putting in a zero because he had all of the copies of the tickets upstairs, so he was able to put them together. And he was a 3 or 4 part ticket. He was able to take all four parts of the ticket at that point and put zeros on the games that won. So those tickets would say 440 to win 400 now instead of 44 to win 40. The losers, he didn't put zeros on there. So he did that for about 2 months. And I hated to be that guy because my boss, Jeff Garrett, almost threw him through the window. But the police came and he went to jail in handcuffs, and I'm sure never to be seen again in this business. But that was a scam that I learned, and it was kind of pulled on me. I think they were using me because I remember those kids betting every weekend, and they were only betting NFL on Sundays. That was the only sport they were betting.
Good thing we don't have handwritten tickets anymore. Next, there was a robbery at Fremont Sportsbook.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Robert Walker, a good friend of mine, very good friend. We met each other playing softball. Him and his brother Eddie were great softball players. They played on our softball team. Remember, softball is how I got the job at Santa Anita. Well, when I met Robert, I was probably in my 2nd or 3rd year at Santa Anita, and Robert was actually writing tickets on the horse side. He loved the horses, and that's what was his first start in the sports industry, was writing tickets at the Santa Anita and the horse book. When Jeff moved to Fremont and brought me with him as a sportsbook director, I brought Robert Walker with me as my #1 ticket writer for sports. So Robert came along. We had a great staff. We had a first great month. It was really busy, and we were working a lot of hours every week. And I remember it was a Saturday evening, and it was like 7 o'clock at night, and it was a busy day. We started at 6 in the morning, and we're getting ready to get out of there. And we're sitting in the back. Jeff and I were talking about the results of the day and how we did. And then all of a sudden, Robert comes popping around the corner, and he pops his head around the corner. Then he looks back down the row, the walkway to where the writers were, their sections were taking bets. He looks back at us with like the biggest surprise face ever, and then takes off running back down the counter. And we're like, what was that all about? And we both got up and walked out, and we walked down the aisle to where the sportsbook ticket writers were, facing the crowd. And he says, some guy just reached over the counter, opened my drawer, and took all the $100 bills. Well, it was 7 o'clock at night, and it was so busy all day. You're supposed to drop $10,000 in cash every time you get over 10,000. Drop that cash to the cashier, and it's in a more secure place. Well, Robert was so busy, and we were so busy all day long. There was over $30,000 in that drawer. Then Robert came to ask us a question, and that guy was just waiting for him to leave his post. And Robert was the only ticket writer left that night because it was late at night. And Robert saw the guy reach over the counter and grab the money out, 2 hands, and out the door, over $30,000. But amazingly, they caught the guy. There's cameras in every sports book. They actually caught the guy. One of the cocktail waitresses recognized him. She knew who it was. She actually saw it happen. So she gave a report on it. They found him about a week later. All the money was gone. I guess that they said he shot it up his arm. So I guess he partied hard for 7 days and had no money left. But they caught him. And Robert Walker, we saved his job. And Robert Walker went on to become the head of the Stardust Racing Sportsbook, the head of the Mirage Racing Sportsbook. He had some great jobs. He's been a big name in this industry, and so glad that, nothing came back in repercussion to hurt him. And just, amazing story. Could have happened to anybody. But yeah, what an amazing day that was.
Another great episode of Behind the Sportsbook Counter with Kenny White. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you, everyone, for watching. In next episode, we'll talk about Nevada sports executives. We'll talk about your purchase of Las Vegas sports consultants and odds making. In that, we'll talk about the sale of LVSC to Cantor Gaming. Thanks again for watching. Thanks again for joining me.